Welcome to the Liberty Without Compromise podcast with Dan and Dawna Wilson. For a year, Dan ran in the race for Kootenai County Sheriff, and while the numbers were not on his side, he still is the people's sheriff. People from all over this county, the region, and nationally have been inspired by the message of liberty without compromise and inspired by a man who has been willing to fight fire with fire. And there is unfinished business. In this episode, we are going in depth to uncover what's going on in the largest, most influential churches in Coeur d'Alene. Have these pastors crossed political lines? Are they involved where they shouldn't be? Are they kingmakers? Who's advising them? Anyone looking for political power and control in Kootenai County knew that controlling the church was an absolute must. This weekend, one of these pastors called Dan a liar from the pulpit. Through our campaign, you've heard some of what has gone on in the conversations that did or maybe didn't happen between Dan and these pastors. Here is our introduction to unfinished business with these power player pastors. And now here's Dan Wilson.
How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Well, as promised, this was something that I was advised and pleaded not to release prior to the election, which I didn't do because people were advising us that the information that we were going to drop was going to put people on overload. People were already stressed over the political scene in general, and people just can't take one more betrayal.
And that it's a lot to digest. That was the other thing. So on overload, but look, if you're trying to cram this in all before the election and you've got a handful of days, it actually is complex. I mean, it's simple on one hand. It's simple, right or wrong, truth or lies. Yeah. But it's a lot to digest, and there just wasn't enough time to really do that and do it correctly.
We're talking about this now because I have to set the record straight. It's not that I want to. It's not that I feel like it. I must set the record straight. We're going to discuss right now a pretty quick snapshot into the overall problem with our experience, my specific experience. But I say we because you were alongside me this entire journey.
Yeah.
But you know what we experienced for well over a year as we, started this journey to run for Kootenai County Sheriff. So we're going to today talk about a really fast snapshot of some of the highlights of one of the pastors. And this was precipitated because I'll get to this in a second here, but we're going to examine in the coming episodes much closer as to the dynamics of what is really going on with these larger churches, evangelical churches right here in Kootenai County. And as you said in your opening, who is advising the pulpit? Who's advising our leaders? Who's really in control of Kootenai County? And so the following episodes in this series, we're going to go into much greater detail. This one's just going to be disclosing about a year's worth of conversation with one of the pastors, and I won't even say me, because it was not really, it was him talking about me. Right? So I did not start this fight with these guys. For the record, I did not start the fight with the one pastor that we've talked about recently that people came unglued. We're going to talk about that as a very own special episode, but I'm compelled right now to talk about this one pastor because he started this. I'm going to finish it this weekend after the election. He decided to get his jabs in against me again. We're going to play this here in his comments in just a second, but from the beginning, I had to battle not the Democrats, not the socialists in this county. I had to battle what I thought was my own people. I had to battle the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee and their associates. And their associates are far and wide, and they're all intertwined. It's incestuous, really. But it includes the churches and their biases. They're not really looking for the best people or the people that are the most godly in their behavior. They're looking for those that are their friends. Well, he's my friend. Mm-hmm. I had no previous relationship with anybody in Kootenai County. I've lived here since 2020. I've been in this region and in this community my entire life. I have friends over here. I've participate in things, but I didn't have the same kind of relationships that I did in Spokane. And I believe that God kept me from developing those relationships so that I could see everybody for who they truly are. To see them
I would agree
with
that, yeah.
with the blinders off. And I don't like what I saw. I don't think you did either. Again, no previous relationship, but there is lots and lots of bias towards the KCRCC folks, period. If you're Republican in this community, you have to be part of their special little gang, their inner circle, or you're nobody. And that's why the North Idaho Republicans split off with them.
Yeah, it's extremely tribal.
And part of what we're going to discuss is the continual theme, which is lies and misrepresentations of me and my message. But they have gone unchecked, unchallenged, these pastors and this specific pastor, because, well, they are like the Republicans that we've talked about. They say a lot of good stuff, but the reality of it is that they talk a good game, but nobody's really paying attention to them.
And bear in mind, while Dan's queuing this up so we can listen to it, bear in mind, ask yourself, why was it so important for the pastors at these levels that have this kind of influence to have Dan Wilson in such a spotlight? Why was it so critical for them to try to control his message or control the information that was going out to the people about who Dan Wilson really was? Right. Why? Just ask yourself, why would that be of such importance to them to not only spend the time that they have over the last year, where that was just kind of like something that would not go away. It was a reoccurring theme. And then all the way to the election is over. Yeah. And this pastor obviously made it a point to bring this in front of his entire congregation for services over the course of a weekend.
Agreed. And before I play this, I just want to say this one thing. Undoubtedly, there will be people that will be majorly upset. And they're going to look at this as, I'm attacking their pastor, their guy.
Yeah.
But it's okay. If you listen to what I am saying and listen to this pastor in his own words, and I'll provide this evidence. Doesn't matter how I got the information. Doesn't matter how I got what he said. I got it in multiple ways. Not only through emails that I personally received and sent, but also from those that were there firsthand, that had enough of it. So instead of getting all spun up and on your self-righteous pony, talking about how dare, maybe you should stop and ask, how dare these so-called men of God behave the way they're doing? When I grew up, pastors were men that truly had a spine of steel, that stood up for the truth, and you could trust them. But guess what? That isn't the world we live in today. We live in a world where pastors are celebrities. And I think that when you hear what I'm going to say here in a little while, you'll understand why I'm saying what I'm saying.
And we don't do this with great joy to say, look, finally, we're on. This is actually with grief.
Yes.
Because having grown up in the church and understanding my personal relationship with Christ and having to realize that our biggest fight over the last year very largely involved these local pastors and churches. It is a grieving process to have to understand what is actually going on here. So
this pastor, and I'm not going to name him, you'll probably figure out who it is, and I'm not going to name him since he didn't technically name me in his sermon, but everybody knew who it was. So again, we're dealing with this right now. We're going to let you listen to what he has to say, and then we're going to go all the way back to the beginning and set up exactly where this all began. So here he is in his own words this past Sunday. What was it? Around the 10th or 11th of November 2024, about 5 days after the election. So here he is.
Fact that not everyone is actually telling us the truth. I can't help but think about politics. This recent elective cycle here in our community, I am stunned at the kind of lies that were told and the way people treated each other. One of our local candidates, I'll leave unnamed, I am already being personally threatened by this particular candidate, recorded a phone call with Pastor Tim Remington, and then took that phone call and made it public without informing Pastor Tim that he had been recorded and or that he was going to release the audio message. I suspect it cost him the race, that along with other things. That kind of thing is what a pastor would be vulnerable to. It happened to me.
Okay.
The fact that
So we have him. Everybody in that church knew who he was talking about. And I wanted to say a couple things before they're forgotten, because we are going to address this again in our next podcast. He says that he is stunned at all the lies told. Well, I have a question for this pastor. Since you ran your mouth publicly about this, provide the lies that I said. I've been accused of lies since the beginning. I've always provided the source and the evidence for my statements, and I stand on every last one of those. When you call me a liar, pastor, those are fighting words. And second of all, when you say that I personally threatened you, again, put up or shut up. Show me where I've ever threatened you, because I've never had a conversation with you. But again, if you're going to go through other people that are telling you and you're going to go through the gossip train, then guess what? You now get to play in the field that you just set, because I have many people that said things about you that now, since you set the precedent of saying that I threatened you, and the only conclusion I can come to, because I've never talked to you, is that you heard something through somebody else. Well, then guess what? Every last thing that other people told about you to me is now on the table. We'll play that game. All right. So to set the stage, I'm running in January. It started in December of 2023. And in the end of January, I sent out an email to this pastor. And this email, I'm going to read it, was very, very brief. In the subject line, it says, request to meet with pastor, name withheld. And that was the subject. And here is what I said. Hello.
But can I also just ask you, when you received the email address or the email address you had for this pastor, was it apparent whether or not it was going directly to him?
No,
or if
because
it was
the email given to me was pastor@blank.org.
Okay.
Okay.
So that could have you didn't know that was going directly to the source. So
Right.
there was need that framed how
Yes.
you wrote
Yes.
your email.
Great point. So I said, hello, I'm running for Kootenai County Sheriff as a Republican and would appreciate the opportunity to have a brief visit with pastor to introduce myself. I have included my press kit, as well as for more info on my background. You will also find more details on my website, theidahosheriff.com. Thank you in advance for your time. Regards, Dan D.W. Wilson, with my phone number. So I think that's pretty apparent what I was asking. I wanted to meet with him, and that's what I asked. So I heard nothing. For week after week, I heard nothing. I believe that I also called and left a voicemail, but I know for certain that I sent this email. So I'm on the campaign circuit, town halls, meet and greets, and people kept coming up to me and they kept saying over and over again, "Have you met our pastor?" This pastor that I sent the email to, because you align with him so close in what he believes in. He just has to hear you. You have to talk to my pastor. And I heard this over and over and over again. And I told people, well, I've sent him an email requesting to meet. And later on, these people get back to me and they say, well, he said you never sent him anything. I'm like, well, I did send him. And, I sent him on this date and time. So then I would periodically send these people, those that were part of his church, that were saying, well, why haven't you met with my pastor? I would send a copy of the email that went out. And then they would confront him with that. And then his point was, well, it wasn't really clear what he wanted. It was extremely vague.
So it changed from
he didn't receive it.
He never got an email to, well, I did, but it was vague. I didn't know what he wanted. It was vague.
And again, some of those people I sent an email to again, because some of them by that time had heard, I hadn't sent them the email, but they had heard that, well, I had contacted him, but it was really unclear what I wanted. And I sent it again. And I don't know. I just read that. Is that unclear what I'm asking for somebody that is involved, not only from a business standpoint, but former law enforcement? And I am trying to be brief with whoever it is that's reading this. Is there anything there that is too vague?
It's not vague. It is very specific. I think where you were at a disadvantage was not knowing that whether it was or was not going directly to him or a secretary, for example. So it would have required...
But it did go directly to him, though.
It did,
Yeah.
as we found out later. But it would have required somebody to respond, to shed some light on that. And it was abundantly clear that you wanted a brief visit.
Yeah.
So you really needed to be made aware of what those next steps would be to make that happen.
Right. So this is now going into the summer. And at this point, I've dropped it. I'm not going to continually, and you know me, I don't pursue people if they're not interested.
Yeah.
I don't
wanna
I'm not a
force-
used car salesman.
Yeah.
I'm not an insurance salesman. I don't go after people when it's apparent that they don't want to meet. And from business, I already know when my emails bounce. So I know that my email didn't bounce, and I'm positive again, because of his response to other people, that it was vague. He did get it. And we're going to find out later on that he did, in fact, get my email. So we're now into the summer, and I have so many of my supporters that go to that church that are attempting to meet with this pastor independently. People are calling him up. They're having conversations. And they're telling him, hey, you got to come meet Dan Wilson, and you got to meet with him.
Because now the people, they're genuinely confused, and they're excited about your message. They're saying, man, this guy's message and his values and what he's saying aligns so much with my pastor. So I think there was genuine confusion on the church constituents' part as to, I don't understand why this is tough to coordinate and why we're hitting a brick wall here.
So then word started getting back that he was saying disparaging things about me, and that he had heard that all I was doing was mudslinging. And so we had supporters that went to church with him. Again, I'm going to make this abundantly clear. I never sent anybody. In fact, I did just the opposite. I urged people to let it be. In fact, I had arguments with campaign staff where I said, we're done. I'm not going down this road. So what I have in my hands right now is a transcript from a actual conversation. I am in possession of the audio. There's no mistaking. And we have the transcripts, and I'm only going to read today in this episode just a portion of it. So bear with me while I read through this.
While
you can hear the paper.
Getting ready with this paper, I want to assure you that because we have very complete, detailed transcripts, there is far more to this, far more behind the scenes, far more to the story. More players, and it all starts to come full circle as to who really is controlling what. And look, we try to leave people on a positive note, but this should make you actually very afraid.
Yeah.
So we're not getting into all that in this episode, and then Dan's gonna lead into the important pieces for this episode.
This was a phone call back in the end of July of 2024, and I'm going to jump in. As Dawna was saying, we're not going to get into the meat and potatoes. We're going to talk about this specific pastor who claims that I never met with him, and So here's what he says. Mid-sentence. He's talking about Dan Wilson. He says, and the problem is, I'm going to be very personal now. Bob Norris I would not call him my close friend, but he is my friend. And I sit with him. I look him square in the eyes, and I can call him out. I talk with him man to man about things. And I've done so every very recently. But I will tell you this, he has never let me down. Every single time I have asked him to do for me, he has done. And so he has my support. And that's kind of the problem, because I realize, is Bob a perfect guy? I don't know. And you know what I mean? But I'm supporting him, and Dan, I'm going to sound very arrogant. Every politician, everybody running for office always calls my office and makes an appointment to see me. Dan has never done that. And I'm not asking him to. And at this point, I'm probably not interested. But in our church, we have members that are supporting Dan and we have members that are supporting Bob. And I just want to let the chips fall where they may at this point. I kind of don't want to have to get into it. I don't want to be divisive in our own church either, because the people in our church that are saying, hey, we're supporting and promoting Dan, I just tell them, that's awesome. Do what you feel is necessary. And they know where I stand, and we're not fighting about it, which is good. The other person on the other end of the line says, can I say something about, I understood a lot of people contact you to discuss the runnings, and it's my understanding that Dan has reached out to you, and I believe that was over email, but he hadn't heard back. The pastor's response: yeah, he sent me one email that was about one sentence, and that was about it. I don't know, 2, 3, 4 months ago. I can't remember. It's something like, if you'd like to talk to me, this is my number, and thanks, Dan. And that's not how you get me. And again, that sounds very arrogant, and I'm sorry, but please forgive me for what I'm about to say. I carry a pretty good weight in our community, and if people want to get to me, they got to get to me the right way. So again, very interesting. We know that he did get my email. Mm-hmm. The person on the other end says, I get that, and I don't know what the email said, but I understand what you're saying. Here's the pastor's response: I don't fault Dan for that. He doesn't know me, and he doesn't know our community. So I don't fault him for that. If he knew how much weight my voice carries in this community, I'm sure he probably would have offered to buy me dinner, not sending me an email saying, if you'd like to talk to me, here's my contact information, which literally was what he said. I'm summarizing it, and it might be misrepresenting it slightly, but it was pretty close to that. Other person: it was a statement versus a question? Pastor: yeah, I think it was something, maybe it was a question, maybe it was a statement, but it was something in the neighborhood of a sentence or two that's something like, hey, this is Dan Wilson. If you'd like to communicate with me about this upcoming race or something, here's my contact information. And that was it, and I just deleted it. No offense. Well, you just read the email that I sent to him. It wasn't one sentence, and I wasn't going, hey, call me.
Right. That
I was humbly
definitely
requesting.
was not the voice in which this was written, no.
So going on, he says after this comment by the person on the other end, does Bob go to church around here too? This is the pastor's response. No, he does not attend my church. He will call me his pastor. He will call me his pastor publicly. He will call me his pastor privately, but he does not attend our church. He does call me often for counsel, and whenever he calls, I answer. And whenever I call him, he answers. And like I said, he's my friend. He's a friend. I wouldn't call him a close friend. We don't have, we don't go to dinner as couples, we don't have that kind of relationship. It's a professional, community relationship. Probably because I see him in authority and he sees me in authority at a different level. Other person: does he go to another church? Pastor: no, I don't believe that Dan or Bob attend a local church. In fact, I'm pretty convinced that Dan does not. Although he professes to be a Christian, I do not believe he is involved in a local church. In fact, and I know you're probably going to take a lot of what I'm saying to him, but I've been told that he was harmed, hurt, or otherwise suffered some kind of what he believed to be some kind of injustice in a Catholic church. Although he was an evangelical at one point and led an Awana group, which is a Bible church type of evangelical Bible church children's ministry. And so his Christian experience is probably as flimsy as Bob's, so they probably both kind of play on the same field there.
That's a lot of intel that he's gotten from somewhere and a lot of assumptions he's making
gossip
about you. Yeah.
A heck of a lot of gossip.
Yeah,
in fact, he probably shouldn't have been running his mouth about any of that without verifying it.
Right.
To claim.
But he was offended.
Yeah. That I didn't.
By an email that you sent, so he deleted it.
Uh-huh.
So it was okay to get information via what other gossip sources and die on that hill. Because, which, you know, again, we were going back in time, but where this conversation started was just this last weekend, he's calling you a liar from his pulpit.
He is, yeah.
So he's taken all this gossip information about you, admittedly trashed your email. You didn't do enough to come to get to him because he's a popular, important person in this town with his influence. So you should have done more. It's your fault.
Yeah.
But yet it's okay for him to smear and destroy and demolish Dan Wilson via what he's heard.
For the record, and no offense to any of my friends, I have many friends that are Catholic, of the Catholic faith. I've never been Catholic in my entire life. So I have no idea. I mean, this is what you and I face this entire time.
Yes.
And rather than be a man and say, hey, Dan, come meet with me. Let's just talk. And, you know, I can ask all these questions I've been hearing. No, he doesn't. He just continues to deflect it. Now, we're going to fast forward because we have another actual transcript from recordings. This is only a small portion of a very long conversation that Don and I have already cut, and it's ready to be distributed for our upcoming podcast that will roll out.
Upcoming episodes.
Upcoming episodes on Liberty Without Compromise. But we want you to hear again how this pastor operates. And if you're offended that we have these, we obtain them legally. And you should suspend your anger and listen to the words of the man who is the pastor of one of the largest politically active churches here in Kootenai County in the city of Coeur d'Alene.
That previous conversation that you just read was from a conversation in July 2024.
Yeah.
This is now jumping forward to sometime in August.
Middle of August.
Middle of August 2024.
Again, these are just excerpts. So, pastor, he is saying, is Dan Wilson a white supremacist? Because I see some of his strongest supporters and the noisy ones that are anti-Semites, and that terrifies me. He goes on to say, when asked about if he would listen to me or anything I had to say, he comes back and he says, I've listened to him enough to know that I dislike him a lot because he is bad-mouthing constantly, and I don't like that kind of campaigning. In fact, I've had this conversation with many people, and you guys know that people generally, I told you this, I totally apologize if this sounds arrogant. Almost everybody that runs for office comes and sees me personally. They make an appointment. They get into my office. Dan's was a one-liner email. I told you, if you want to get to know me, here's how to get a hold of me. I don't pursue them. They pursue me. Interesting, huh?
And okay, so I actually
read this again.
I'm just going to take a break because this pastor's referencing Dan's original email. And so just as a refresher, here's the original email. And you do say hello. So there is some lack of personalization there because you didn't know that a generic email address that you were given. We don't know. You don't know. So you say hello. I'm running for Kootenai County Sheriff as a Republican and would appreciate the opportunity to have a brief visit with pastor to introduce myself. And again, the lack of formality there is because you don't know if you're requesting this through a secretary or what. I've included our press kit as well as for more information on my background. You will also find more details on my website, and you give that. Thanks in advance for your time. Yes, your name and phone number's on here, but that's typical to any email signature. So it clearly requires, both parties would know this requires a response to know what you can do next to make that happen.
So coming back to this conversation that took place in August that we have the audio recording of, that we now have made into transcripts to read this. He goes on to say, now I'm going to be a jerk. I know you're here to try to get me to pay attention to Dan Wilson. Dan Wilson has not done a thing to get my attention. He has not called, asked for an appointment, offered to take me to dinner or lunch. He's not wined and dined me. And you know what? It sounds arrogant, but that doesn't fly with me. If you want my attention, come and talk with me. And I'd like to put him on a hot seat. I'd like to put him on a stool in front of this church and say, we're going to ask you a bunch of questions. And if you're going to answer it, and that's the way I want to approach it. Fascinating.
And for a guy that says he he's got people coming in attempting to force him into knowing who you are.
Right.
But if that's his stance, then how in a conversation in July is he presenting a bunch of rumored facts about you, pretending to know all of these things and now feigning innocence, like you're just forcing me to get to know who this guy is? But he seems to have a pretty good idea of who he thinks you are already.
Yeah, agreed. And he goes on in this. Again, we're just giving a flyby because we're going to, in our next episodes that we've cut, go into much deeper content. He says, does Dan go to church? Now, he's already talked to this person in the previous conversation over the phone. Now, this is in person. Does Dan go to church? Can I tell you what I heard? Is this gossip, by the way?
He asked first. Can I
Can
tell you what I heard?
you what I heard? What I've heard is he was an evangelical Christian and he became a Catholic. And then as a Catholic, he had an affair with his assistant, divorced his wife. His present wife was his former assistant. Now they're married and he got excommunicated from the Catholic Church because of that. News to me. I don't even know how to pray the rosary. He goes on. I just don't play the political game. I have loyalties, and my loyalties right now are with Bob in spite of him.
He doesn't play. We're not getting into it, but or he doesn't play the political game, really.
Yeah.
I know we're not getting into it.
He goes on, read that well, okay? This guy has never let me down. If I call him and say I need something, he's there.
He's talking about Bob Norris.
If he needs something, again, I'm only giving you my perceptions. Who is Dan Wilson? Why did he come here? Why is he attacking our sheriff? Who's my friend? I don't know anything about this guy, and he doesn't have the respect for me to come to me directly. And forgive me again, I'm going to say this. I carry a lot of weight in this town. I would think that would be, if this guy was wise, he would say, I'm going to get to pastor before I get to anybody. So forgive me for that. That sounds terribly arrogant. Yeah, you're right, pastor. You are completely arrogant. Completely. You're not like any real pastor that I remember growing up with. And I grew up with some extremely hard men that were real pastors that would never, ever imply that somebody had to wine and dine them to come and have a discussion. Now, in fact, one of the pastors that I love is a man by the name of Wes that was also a farmer. And he knew the word of God inside and out, had no problem calling out lies and evilness and reminding us of the fruits of the Spirit, works of the flesh. But you continually show what you're actually doing when you say, please forgive me. I know it sounds arrogant because you know damn good and well that you are being arrogant. Pastor goes on. Now, we have people in this church that I love dearly who are divided over this. And I don't want blank church divided. I'm just trying to keep my mouth shut and pray because you know what? We have some very, very wonderful people that go to this church who are very outspoken in favor of Dan. And they have approached me too, just like you. And I said, look, here's my position. You guys do what you feel convicted to do for you. You have my applause. Do what you feel good about. We've got no issues. And I'm going to stop there. So we have established that he knew that I tried to get a hold of him. We established that he's Bob's friend, that they're not couples. I mean, I guess their wives and them don't go out to dinner, but anytime he calls Bob, Bob answers him. And whenever Bob calls him, he answers. He's gossiping a bunch about things about me that he doesn't know. And he's acting as if they are true. But he's admitted that the way that Dan Wilson tried to get a hold of him wasn't to his standard. Instead of commenting back to Dan Wilson saying, hey, here's how you have to get a hold of me. You have to wine and dine me. My solution is just to ignore you. And the people that reported this to us were so shocked. They were disgusted. They will never go back to that church again.
Well, it didn't make any sense.
No.
But based on the information we have now, it most certainly does make sense.
Which we're going to go into more detail.
We will. So do you want to shed just briefly a light, because it plays into this next episode, but when you talked about this pastor saying things about you that very distinctly, we have to understand that this really was not in private. The things he was saying was coming from somewhere, and there indeed was somebody else present in that room.
Yes.
So why don't you lead us into a little bit of that setting and realizing that there's another person in the room, and then knowing who those people.
Yeah. So the other person that was there, and a little spoiler, was there to give, quote, legal advice, not as an attorney, but to give a legal perspective, is a former Department of Homeland Security agent. So this individual is a self-described and verifiable former Homeland Security agent whose spouse is also former Homeland Security in one of the other divisions. And this individual flies a helicopter as a volunteer for the Bob Norris helicopter debacle, for that volunteer program for the helicopter they don't own. But this federal agent that we're talking that was in the room, or shall I say former federal agent, is involved very close with Bob Norris, an advisor to him, involved in all sorts of Republican gatherings, a former tort claims investigator for the state of Washington. This person is involved in a lot of conservative movements. And in fact, I can't verify this, but at a local regional prepping group, was heard to say in front of many witnesses that they would shoot any federal agent between the eyes if they came after them. These are dangerous people.
They are. And you have to understand that this is who was present in the room when these statements about, when they're trying to form in somebody's mind an opinion of who Dan Wilson is. These are not thoughts that are merely coming from a pastor. This is groupthink that was created by some group, by some committee, and Dan has now set the scene for you to understand that other voice in that room, which we'll be revealing in the upcoming episode, largely controlled this conversation. Yeah. So as much as you just now heard that pastor say through Dan's voice in these transcripts, the other entity that was in the room very much controlled that conversation.
And the other advisors that we'll talk about briefly is people that are self-proclaimed journalists here, local journalists or activists. So there's a couple, and they're very well known online forum here, report everywhere. There is also, along with this former Homeland Security advisor, another activist that came from California who miraculously was able to escape arrest when this individual staged a protest at the Capitol for some environmental things and winds up here and is an outright liar over and over again.
And everybody else who they got to activate was arrested, and then that person somehow, like you said, miraculously
kind of like
was
Ray
not.
Epps. Reminds me of Ray Epps. Okay, so in conclusion, I'm going to leave with the final words from this pastor. Now, we've already established that I sent, for those that may just be joining, I sent out an email of introduction requesting a meet with the pastor of this big church in Coeur d'Alene, very politically active. Everybody in this town knows this pastor. I was continually told that I didn't send an email, and then when I sent proof that I'd sent the email, it came back that it was too vague, and then the story kept changing. And we hear now, as we went along from these transcripts, that the pastor himself admitted to it, but I wasn't whining and dining him enough. I wasn't doing enough to get his attention, as he said. Wasn't buying him a steak dinner. So that last conversation took place in August. And at the end of September, I received an email from this pastor.
Oh, that's right.
And I'm going to read this. It was sent in September on the 27th. So I've never had one, not a personal conversation, not another email, no direct messages, nothing, only what he's saying to other people about me. Here's what he says. Hi, Dan. I was recently told by a member of the church that I don't want to talk to you. This is untrue. In fact, it seemed to me that you did not want to talk with me. Several months ago, you did send me an email inviting me to seek you out. Frankly, that offended me, and I discarded the email. I do not intentionally seek out candidates, nor do I look to engage in the political process unless it directly relates to moral, biblical issues, yet all political issues do. Therefore, and for that reason, I have been viewed as politically active as a pastor. This is an accusation I am unashamed about and do not deny. That said, I do not see myself as one on a political mission, as I think you would understand. Okay, I'm going to break this down real quick.
He's not political. He's like, I'm not politically active, but I am politically active because all politics
Everyone
comes back to moral and ethics.
I think you call that a lie.
Morals. Yeah.
I think you call that a lie.
What?
So I'm going to break this down. He says, several months ago, you did send me an email inviting me to seek you out. What part of my request to meet with him did I ever say seek me out?
It says I would appreciate the opportunity to have a brief visit with the pastor and introduce myself.
You really think way more of yourself than what you really are worth, man. You're gaslighting. What you're doing right now is you're gaslighting me. And you picked the wrong guy to have done this to, just to be clear. Because I ain't afraid of you. I couldn't care less if I don't get invited to any of your church meetings or the KCRCC groups. Don't care. You've crossed the line. He goes on, I do not intentionally seek out candidates, nor do I look to engage in the political process unless it directly relates to moral biblical issues. Again, really, man? He says, I have been approached by many of your supporters and have told several of them that I am easy to find and that you should make an appointment to see me as all other candidates have done over the years. It was easy for your people to get to me. Therefore, they understood. I have never had a candidate for office send or allow their advocates to pursue me rather than coming personally. Again, you're full of shit, pastor. And I'm not blanking this out. The pastor is full of shit. I requested a meeting as respectfully as possible. I did not send anybody to go and talk with you. In fact, your own people went to talk with you, including one lady who you've had many, many emails with that is very well known in this community. And I've seen those emails. So as much as you probably want to fantasize that some guy that was running for office like me desperately wanted to talk with you, the fact of the matter is, once I figured out that you were never going to give me the courtesy or give me any kind of respect, common courtesy, I wrote you off. I couldn't care less about what you thought. You can ask any of my supporters. Time and time again, I told them to drop it. They went there because they actually believed in you. And you've been exposed because it wasn't that they desperately wanted me to talk to you. They wanted their pastor, who they thought highly of, to come and to speak directly with a candidate. So you can swing that bat and you come up with a huge strikeout, brother, because I couldn't care less about you or what kind of favor you thought that I was going to give to you. Your people came to you as people that were in your congregation. You know, your sheep. Aren't you a pastor? Aren't you supposed to be shepherding people? He goes on. In the event that you don't know, I offered to host you here at our church for a public forum. I told more than one of your very active supporters to inform you of this offer. By the way, why in the hell can't he call me directly? He's, again, telling me that my supporters can find him. I can't find him, but then he wants to send messages through my supporters. Yeah. I mean, this guy is like talking out both sides of his mouth.
Yeah. Well, I think what it reveals is he's a very conflicted individual. Yeah. And we'll get into more of why that is.
However, I have heard nothing of it. It could be that my mistake was sending this message rather than inviting you myself. Wow, what a concept. However, I will be redundant if I tell you again that I've never sought out a candidate. Dan, some of the aforementioned supporters you have working for you have developed a campaign strategy of Bob Norris bashing rather than Dan Wilson promoting. This is the wrong approach. Moreover, now there is a slanderous campaign against me. Your comment to one of the church members made me wonder if you are misinformed about what is occurring or if you are directing the negative campaign strategy your advocates are advancing. I don't even understand what he's even saying right there.
I was going to say, maybe I'm like, I got lost on that one. I don't know what he's talking about.
I have no clue what he's even saying. Again, campaign against him.
Yeah.
I only told people that you never met with me. You didn't have the courtesy to return any of my calls. So again, if that's haunting you and on your conscience, if the Spirit is laying it on you, that's on you, not on me. He goes on, from what I've been told, you are a believer and have a long reputation in Spokane. Moreover, I have been briefed about your stand regarding the Constitution, borders, and many things. I have no bone to pick with you on these very serious issues.
I wonder who he's been briefed by.
Well, it's the same ones that we're going to talk about tomorrow that would say the opposite. They are terrified of me.
Yes. Yeah.
However, as I have mentioned to the seething Dan advocates, which are all the people that go to his church, because everybody that's come to him were his congregates, so he calls his congregates seething. The seething Dan advocates, the approach they are taking and the slanderous campaign tactics they are engaging in is not becoming of you as a professing believer, nor is it of them. Dan, take the high road. If you want to be the sheriff of Kootenai County, do so by trusting the Lord and representing him with integrity, not by bashing your opponent. Your advocates are hurting you, and your website isn't helping. We do need Christians fighting. We do not need Christians fighting with Christians in this country. Too much is at stake. Please remember, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. This is the same advice I have given to Bob, praying for us all. I mean, look at the gaslighting and the projecting that just went on.
Yeah, he's praying while he was praying that he gets wined and dined by people who want his favor.
And the slanders campaign, I mean, what did I do that was slanders towards this pastor and his church?
Right.
Provided, again, didn't come from me. I can't control what other people who support me that go to your church have to say.
And
can't.
They became rightfully increasingly disturbed.
Yeah.
So that's why they had to pursue it. They felt in their own conscience compelled to pursue it with their pastor.
Yeah. So rather than ever calling me up and saying, hey, a lot of things have been said over the past 7-8 months, I'd like to start at ground zero, just have a conversation with you and kind of clear the air. Would you be interested in meeting with me? He didn't do that. 9 months after I sent my first email to him, and the continual denying, and then the story changing on his end, and then all the things that he continually said about me and blamed that I didn't wine him and dine him enough. Well, now we find ourselves 9 months later with an email where he's going to set me in my place. He's going to accuse me of things. He's going to gaslight me and attempt to make me feel bad so that, I can actually, start straightening up and doing the right thing, taking the high road. He's praying for us. He's praying for us all. He's whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Sounds like a pretty damn good verse for you, Pastor. So I didn't respond, and I wasn't going to be responding because I don't respond to abuse like that. I'm going to say it again. I don't respond to abuse like that. This pastor was abusive towards me the entire year. If he just wants to talk about him being a man, well, you're a disrespectful man in the community. If you want to talk about being a pastor, you failed. There isn't one thing that you did in your response to me from the very beginning that ever mirrored something that a pastor, a true shepherd would do. And sir, I've been around some mighty men who didn't have half the size of your congregation, but were more godly men than you could ever hope to be. You start acting like this. So after he didn't hear my response, because I'm not going to respond, he sent me one more email. In the event that you did, he sent this a week later. In the event that you did not receive the email below, I'm sending it to the email address I received from another local pastor. We know who that pastor is. For the record, as I mentioned below, I have asked Bob to take the high road just as I've asked you. Moreover, I have asked that all members of our church take the high road as well, in spite of who they choose to support in this race for Kootenai County Sheriff. I am aware of posts and conversations that I found inappropriate of Christians, even some from our church. I have asked that there be a cease and desist of such communication. For the record, I do not represent the positions or behaviors of the members of our church, and the members do not represent me. I do pastor those who attend here and ask and seek their Christian maturity, even when emotionally driven. So he's talking about my seething supporters and how they're slandering, and he's assuming that I control them, but yet he's then calling out those that in his own church that are part of his advisors that we're going to talk about in our next episode These people have an online presence, and we've got the screenshots all the way from January when these people who call themselves Christians and they go to this church, who never met me one time, the heinous things they started saying about me, the heinous things that they said to me in public, the cussing me out, the making fun about my sexuality. He was referring to, well, I've asked them to pull those posts down. We know that not only did they not pull those posts down, but they then participated to an even greater extent, including going after our good friend Mike at the Patriot Hangout.
Yeah.
So I'm going to conclude here reading the rest of this. As I mentioned earlier, I have no bone to pick with you and see that many of your stated plans and actions harmonize with what I want for our county. Interesting. We're going to bring this back tomorrow because this contradicts what he said earlier.
Very, very conflicted.
That you and I haven't read yet.
Yeah.
I am planning to vote, and I'm simply asking all members of our church to do the same without name calling and without person bashing, without condescending speech, etc. I will admit that I watched your recent podcast and am embarrassed to learn that you recorded a broadcast and broadcasted a phone call with Pastor Tim Remington. Tim and I are friends and co-laborers in the gospel. I always love these churchy phrases, right?
Yeah.
Because am I supposed to now think that I need to respect him even more?
As everybody knows, we're both into the churchy phrases.
Mm-hmm. That was a low bar. Recording and playing a phone call with a pastor is very disturbing. Yeah, it's very disturbing when you're proving that pastors are lying. And you're more concerned about the method on how you receive something rather than the conduct and the bad behavior of the pastors. Again, you are so out of touch. I do hope, he goes on, I do hope Tim knew that you were recording him. If not, your actions speak of a low standard and cause me to feel that you cannot be trusted. I hope I am wrong about this. I recognize that I am not your pastor and that I have no authority to speak to you in correction. However, as a member of the clergy to this community, I do see myself as an authority in matters of Christian behavior, and therefore I speak up. Please, as mentioned in my earlier email, take the high road. As a confessing brother in Christ, I love you. I love our community. I want only good for all of us. Galatians 6:10. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. Hey, Pastor, did you have an opportunity to do good to me when I didn't contact you in the way that Your Highness needed to be contacted? Because I didn't buy you a steak dinner, because I didn't make you feel good, I didn't rub your back and salivate all over you? You are the biggest hypocrite, the biggest full of yourself pastor I have ever observed on this side of the state line. Zero respect for you. And we're here again because of what he said about me on Sunday from the pulpit.
Yeah, a good reminder is to understand, as Dan stated just a bit ago, that what really Dan has been the recipient of is abuse by this pastor over an entire year.
Yes.
So
and his proxies.
So bringing this down to an episode of a podcast, this wasn't a knee jerk. This was painstakingly thought through, and as I've mentioned before, it is a process of grief to even have to come to this. But to change the focus to a guy, how dare a guy record a conversation? Because they're not going to address why any of this is now being talked about, which is originally spreading lies and rumors about somebody and thinking you're going to go unchecked. You're all now only trying to put out a fire because and shift the focus back to how dare Dan Wilson because of their bad behavior in the first place. So I don't know if you were going to play this.
I'm going to play this one last time to remind you what this pastor, who I've just spent the past hour reading all of his correspondence and what he really thinks about those that don't bow to him as the potentate that he thinks he is. Here he is again in his own words on Sunday, a couple days after the election.
Not everyone is actually telling us the truth. I can't help but think about politics. This recent elective cycle here in our community, I am stunned at the kind of lies that were told and the way people treated each other. One of our local candidates, I'll leave unnamed, I am already being personally threatened by this particular candidate, recorded a phone call with Pastor Tim Remington, and then took that phone call and made it public without informing Pastor Tim that he had been recorded and or that he was going to release the audio message. I suspect it cost him the race, that along with other things. That kind of thing is what a pastor would be vulnerable to.
Pastor vulnerable. He sure sounds like a very vulnerable, fragile man, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you said, Pastor, all things will eventually come to light. And I'm very confident in my position before my Lord and Savior, who I actually converse with every single morning when I read his word. When I ask him for wisdom, I ask him to forgive my sins. When I say, search me, O God, and know my heart, try my thoughts, try me and know my thoughts. See if there be any grievous way in me and lead me into the way eternal. I'm very, very secure in my relationship with Jesus Christ. And I'm going to call you out. There's more to come because we have so much more that we need people in Kootenai County to understand who these people are and ask, why are they really here? Who are they really here for? Because we're seeing the veil pulled back, and these people are manifesting who and what they really are. So we're going to leave it at that. As always, thanks for joining us. I understand if you're upset. I get it. These are hard things to hear, especially if this man happens to be your pastor. How dare somebody attack him? But liberty without compromise. I will not bow to anybody that's doing wrong. I will not be cornered. I will not be cowed by any of them. Stay strong and courageous. Tune in for the upcoming follow-up podcast where we're going to be talking directly about the federal agents that are involved with this pastor and how deep this really goes and why you as a citizen in Kootenai County and in northern Idaho need to be very concerned about what your Republican church leaders are doing and whether or not you all are being set up for something that you don't even want to think about. So God bless you all. Stay strong, courageous. Out.
That's our introduction to Dan Wilson's unfinished business with these power player pastors. This is an extension of the Idaho Sheriff podcast, Liberty Without Compromise. Thank you for listening to this first episode. And subscribe to the Idaho Sheriff podcast to make sure that you will not miss these future episodes. They will be, I would say, life-changing. Yeah. Thank you. LibertyWithoutCompromise.com.